I think we had a couple of things that I put out there to talk about. Some different things that I've seen in social media recently. One of them was, how do you decide how long your chapters are going to? Does anybody want to start off with that?
I'll start. Um, Although the way I will answer that is to say I really don't, except to play it by feel completely. And I know I chapters, and so sometimes I'll have a vague idea of what should happen, but generally it's more like I'll just write, and then I'm like, that seems like a good point to break it into a chapter, and then I start the next chapter. Um, and I've never really felt that there's a problem with that because I think when I'm writing, if I feel like this is a natural breaking point, then it probably is for the reader as well. So that's generally how I do it.
Yeah, that's kind of how I do it too. Um, I can probably do okay even if there weren't any chapters. If there was just a blank line between scenes or a bunch of asterisks, that would be fine with me, except for that navigation thing where, you want to go back and check a name, or did someone really say something, or exactly what happened here because it seems to be important for whatever I'm reading at that point, but I've forgotten the details, so I want to kind of go back. And it's easy to flip back in a print book, but I find it really hard to kind of dart around in an ebook trying to land on the right spot. But if you can go back to the chapter list and the chapters have titles that sort of suggest kind of what's going on, although titles don't always do that. Sometimes they're just sort of arty, but still you can kind of use them as navigation points. So that's kind of my thoughts on chapters. Otherwise, I sort of assign them the way Berthold does. There's a natural break, so you create a space there, and then when you're finishing up getting the book ready to put out, you might actually call that chapter something or other. But I think the chapters somehow aesthetically should be more or less the same length throughout. Even though the action might have, you'll have a 2-page chapter and then you'll have a 20-page chapter. That just doesn't feel right to me somehow. And the other thing with really short chapters is if you're putting your book out in print and you're formatting it yourself and you're doing it properly where each chapter starts on a new right-hand page, and that makes formatting harder because then you have to work out the stuff about which pages should have page numbers and headers, and until that part is what drives me crazy about formatting. So having a whole lot of little short chapters that are treated that way would be just make the whole thing tougher. Plus the book would use up more paper, and that's maybe not such a good thing either. So I guess I'm in favor of longer chapters, but the stuff I write lends itself better to longer chapters than a true thriller where you probably do need short ones. So that's my thoughts on chapter length right there.
Off topic, but I want to go on to something you said. The problem with formatting, in particular the headers. I've pretty much given up having headers on the pages for paperbacks because I simply cannot figure out how to turn them on and turn them off in the right places. So I've just given up on that.
Yeah, well, it comes down to section breaks, and then each time something changes, you have a thing that says keep it the same or change it. But no, I'm kind of out of that realm right now, so I'll have to relearn it all when I do the next work, which probably will be next spring. So,
how about you, Richard?
Well, before I talk about chapter one, just to continue on that point, I use Word, and we could take a whole episode about how you can create chapters and subchapters that are in your head into whatever. But I will tell this: it's still a nightmare because there are hidden, invisible section and begins that you think you've deleted and you haven't. You'll put that view on, and then even deleting them is like you got to do some. So yeah, that is a nightmare. That is a nightmare. But when you do work it out, it does lead to a nice professional look. But okay, so for chapter 11, again, as Berthold said, it's mainly by gut feeling. At first, as I'm writing them, I just want to write conceptually what I want to get out, and then I see how long it is. And I think that's the key. Like I again, I come from a usability background, so part of my brain is always moving me towards shorter chapters because it's just it's easier to retain, it's easier to make a pause if you need to, etc. So I think in books or works where I've had long chapters, etc., like in my most recent one, I was a couple of chapters that were very long subchapter. I'll do that, and then you don't have to worry too much about the formatting because subchapters can go page to page, but depends on what style you know. But the other point I wanted to bring up, because when I read the email, it made me think of something that I've repeated a number of times. When I read the article, talk about knowing your audience. You can never make generalizations about audiences. However, I will say this: I do think overall there has been a trend, both in books and chapters, to get briefer, smaller, for the writing to get terser. That is a trend that I think I've always loved to talk about this. There's a historical reason for that. Do you mind if I go off on a tangent?
Tangents are
Okay. Way back, during the Industrial Revolution, mainly I'm talking about England and the Northern European countries, but after a fashion, I think with a 50 to 70-year lag, the U.S. as well, and then Canada, etc. But there was a rise in a middle class that actually now had leisure time. And what that did is it changed the landscape of leisure in that parks were now considered as something to create for people to spend time in, and to beautify the environment, etc. But it's because that middle class actually wasn't working night and day, night and day, night and day. You actually had time to relax and enjoy. But what was available? Well, printing, by coincidence or not, was becoming more and more automated, mass production, et cetera, printing presses and, newspapers everywhere, et cetera. So books were the likely candidate for spending leisure. But that's all there was pretty much. So books, when you read Dickens and you read Austen, you read all those, they can be this thick, and that's great because people had hours and months to enjoy, and even a year to enjoy a book, a single book. So you would actually embellish your chapters. You'd write as much descriptions as possible so people could be transported, because even travel was lengthy and time consuming and expensive. So you had that luxury. But as people travel all over now, via internet no less, you don't have to get on a plane or go anywhere. You can look at anything. And as we have so much competition for leisure time, there's so many things to choose from. I think that's what the driver is, going from big to small. So we're being conditioned for small. And people usually talk about TV and commercials. No, I think the conditioning is just being conditioned from how we spend our leisure time. So yes, sorry for that diversion, but that also is part of what leads me to say when I'm reading my book at the end, because that's what I do sometimes. I will write huge chapters and not worry about it. Titling and chapter length, I don't worry about when I'm writing. But then when I step back, I go, okay, I've read that part. Where's a good break? And then one thing, Audrey, I will say, I do agree sometimes with you that if it's short, long, that could be disconcerting. But there are times when an author may do that for a reason and it kind of works. Like I'm thinking of Carrie Rubin's second book, The Bone, not the Elixir, not the Cursed Thief, but she diverges to go from point of view. It's really just a one-page chapter. But the reason why she's doing that is to, again, shift point of view, which I know.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So yeah, again, you have to, as an author, you have to sit back and read what you've written, not just for editing and that low level, but that high level, and decide how you want to divide, how you want to shift perspective, where the logical breaks are. So,
yeah. Actually, the difference in length, I don't think is a problem, and if a short chapter works, that's good. But no, it's just me sort of thinking about it in the abstract. I keep thinking, they should all be the same.
I've actually have read books where it's kind of like, it makes you wonder why they actually sit there, and I'll say, why did they break there? It's almost like they felt like they needed to, but they didn't. The storyline was going really gung ho, and and you're captivated. So no, I agree. There are times that those divisions might seem arbitrary, and they should. There should be a purpose for your division.
Yeah, and I think it is somewhat governed by that whole cliffhanger thing and short chapters. I think that comes out of movies and TV, watching stuff where instead of you kind of approach it the way you would that medium, and you try to how you switch from scene to scene in a movie. It's more like that rather than writing. So,
but I think you're onto something about the changing world in which we read. And I've been wondering this for the last few years. I think I tweeted about, or wrote in my blog about. I think about the books that I read when I was in my 20s. Stephen King books and John Grisham books, and they were 150,000 word books at least. Stephen King probably 200,000 words. And now, if you read a novel that's 100,000 words, I think that's unusual.
Yeah.
King still does what King does, and some of the people who've been around for a long time, but they're getting shorter and shorter. And I think one of the things that I always have seen over the years is 80,000 words. Well, when you think about it, 80,000 words is actually a short novel. It's not very long. And I just think, like you said, there's so many other things competing for our attention, for our entertainment dollar, for, anything else. People want shorter hits, quicker hits. I was thinking in terms of the books and stories that I've written with respect to this. And I'm like, I think, what Bertold said, it's just kind of a gut feeling, for the most part. But once I figure out the length of a chapter in a particular book, I want them to generally be about the same length. Because I think Audrey said, you don't want a two-page chapter followed by a 20-page chapter. It just kind of, it doesn't, I don't know. But that said, in the novel that I published earlier this year, all of those chapters are what I would say short chapters. For the most part, they're about 4 or 5 pages. And then there's a point in the story where the climactic event occurs. And what I wanted to do leading up to that climactic event was create a little bit of a sense of immediacy or urgency. So the last few chapters leading up to that event were much shorter.
Right. Good technique.
And it just, again, was just because I wanted to create this feeling. And I felt like shorter chapters, switching back and forth between the 3 main characters as we get to that event, that would help do that. I don't know if it did. I don't know if readers felt that way when they read it, but that was my objective. Then I look at the novella that I published 2 years ago, and it's just it's a slower, I think, more thoughtful story. And when I wrote it, I didn't actually think about it in terms of chapters. I thought about it in terms of parts. And there are 6 parts in it. The first and the last one are shorter, but the middle 4, they're all like 25 pages long. And so to me, the chapter length depends on what your objective is. Again, what is it? What's the feel? What's the rhythm you want in this story?
It's true. Rhythm is another key element. So we talked about at least sort of consistency is one way to start. In fact, I do the same thing. I map out about roughly, I think in my mind, it's going to be about 20 pages long, same number. And then you might have shifting because of either something like a point of view or an insert or tempo. Consider your tempo. Yeah. So yeah, I think there are, again, we could probably, and I think it would be great to keep listing more factors that would say, well, assume a consistent number to start with. What are the things that would cause you to divert from that? And we have 2 good ones at least. Anyone else?
Yeah, change in point of view or sort of speeding up building up to something.
Yeah.
and adding little blocks until you hit the high point. Yeah, I'm going to be chapter dividing the second half of the work in progress. And I'm sort of not looking forward to it, but maybe this will help this talk.
I don't know if you guys read the short story I wrote for that prompt writing exercise that I did. It's called Facilitation, the one where, each day there's another word. So I decided to turn that into something longer, and I've been working on it. And I'm using NaNoWriMo to try to motivate me to write a lot on it this month. And a strange thing happened. The first 4,000 words or so were broken into 6 different chapters, I think. So very, very short chapters. And then I got to this point in the story where after about 4,000 words, I decided I needed to have like a backstory to fill in how the characters got to where they were. And that backstory has gone on for 6,000 words now. And it's written as a single chapter, which, I'm basically trying to use, as I said last night on Twitter, I'm trying to live the nano ethos, which is you just write. You just write. You don't think about chapters. You don't think about whether it makes any sense. You just write. But I know that at some point, I'm going to have to go back and figure out how to weave this huge backstory into the story and create chapters that makes. I don't even know right now or what I'm going to do.
Well, I would suggest don't worry about chapters until you're finished it and you've decided whether you're going to delete anything major, add anything major, or move things around. And once you've got it to the point where you think it's good that way, then you can worry about chapters. Otherwise, you'll move a chunk out and suddenly one chapter will get a lot longer and the other one will be left just a little nub. So, why do you want to do that? So I would wait.
Oh, I know. And I'm basically writing this completely differently than I've written anything since I wrote my first novel. Because ever since I wrote my first novel, everything I've written since then, I think about all of this stuff constantly. It's what kind of slows me down at times. And this is the first time 18 years where I'm just writing and writing and writing and not worrying about, does this fit? Does this make sense? Should I start a chapter now? I'm just writing.
Yeah, that's good.
So, anything else on chapter length?
Well, one other thing occurred to me as we were talking. You mentioned about the 80,000 word thing. I know when I first considered, self-publishing and publishing online, et cetera, and I was looking into what submissions for if I were going down that route would be, and they did say yes, about like 80,000 words because manuscript people have just X amount of time to read through 1,000 submitted manuscripts. But they did say for a science fiction and fantasy that could be 100, 110 is still acceptable for a manuscript if you're submitting it to a publisher for consideration. And the reason given for that is because science fiction fantasy, by its nature not being our known, familiar world, very often you'd have to add more descriptive content. So I remember reading that, and then it made me think just now, how about genre? And again, this has to do with tempo. This has to do with what your goals are. And I do want to say this, if I'm going to talk about genre, I do not believe in hard and fast rules there ever anywhere. I'm just saying, as an effect, I would say if I were reading a mystery, right, a whodunit, I think as a reader, a long, thick book or very, very long chapters wouldn't serve well. Whereas again, a fantasy novel, you are getting lost in it. You could actually, in fact, find yourself, as I have sometimes when they're really well written, reading through the night, not realizing it's 4 in the morning, right? So, I'm wondering how the rest of you feel about that. Does genre, do you think, have an impact both on chapter and book size, or well, it does, but hardly.
I think, that's one of the things I was going to say and forgot. But yeah, what type of story are you writing? And I think, your horror or science fiction, they might all have a sort of expected, flow, rhythm, that type of thing. And again, the rhythm of the story affects chapter length, at least to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I
I think it would be more the story that determines it. And if your story is a thriller, it'll probably have a lot of sort of fairly fast-moving action, and the scenes would change fairly rapidly. On the other hand, if you're writing something literary, you might have a slower pace, and so probably longer chapters. So I think it's not so much that genres have rules about chapters. I think it's just genres have a certain pace to them, and that determines the chapter length.
Right. Yeah. But I don't avoid the word rules or genre. I really that's my golden rule. But yeah, I think there's a sense of, again, what you want to present to the reader in that particular genre you may be considering, and that could affect how you want the tempo of your story to be. Okay.
One of you said something about sometimes chapter breaks don't really make sense when you're reading what someone else has written, and I'm actually reading something like that. The chapters are, I don't know how to describe it, but frequently a chapter ends and the first sentence of the next chapter is basically just a continuation.
Right. I think,
there's a chapter here.
Yeah, I think the book I was reading, honestly, I had the feeling that I thinking to myself, this author must have thought this chapter is going too long. He decided to cut it here because she thought it was too long. I would have, if I knew her, I would have said, no, it's fine. You're doing well right there. Don't feel constrained by that. So it's a long chapter. You got me interested, You're right. The next sentence of the next chapter was pretty much, a continuation. I was like, yeah, so I have seen that.
I wanted to say one thing about chapters always ending with a cliffhanger, which is just that when I was a kid, there was a series of books that was like, it was a Star Wars themed spin-off of the Goosebumps books. And so it's like horror for kids, basically. But every chapter with that ended with like, oh, and he saw a zombie coming around the corner. And then next chapter is, oh, but it was just a guy in a mask or something like that.
Yeah, the old Flash Gordon serials. Yeah,
exactly. Yes, and after a while it got to be almost like a joke or exhausting. Now, I mean, these are kids' books, so whatever. But I could see if you followed that advice, you could end up with something where.
Oh my gosh! Yeah. It's funny when we did mention that last week, and I was thinking of that, and I didn't get a chance. But Flash Gordon serials, well, that's the way they were, right? So they would blow up, and then you have to tune in the next week, go to the movie theater when my father was a kid, and then you'd see, oh, they survived that or whatever. Every single scene had to end like that, and you don't want that in your book for sure.
No, I think that's one of those pieces of advice or rule or whatever that, again, maybe it works in a particular style of story, but I think it's an extremely rare genre or style that would require a cliffhanger at the end of each chapter. And at some point you just start, I think someone in the last conversation used the word manipulated. That's, I think,
that
is manipulated.
Yeah, and I think it would show. Like, I think if you had your plot and then you twiddled with it to engineer these cliffhangers, especially if it was a genre that didn't really lend itself well to that, then it would just distort the thing, and it would end up being worse than it would have been if you hadn't done that.
Yeah.
When you're having a meal, you want to move from course to course. That's another. That keeps you moving, is knowing that some conceptual thing is completed. The story's still going on, but so you're still compelled to continue to read, but that whole chapter has completed. It's self-contained, and now I can move on to the next one. As long as the storyline has got me hooked, that's good enough. So
But taking your multi-course meal, each course, the last bite is the absolute best.
Just keep them coming back for more, always. That last bite, you're right. You got to walk out of that restaurant and go, wow, that was good.
Anybody want to talk about point of views and whether or not there's a the risk of too many. This was a tweet where someone tweeted, "Is having three different point of views in the same story too much?" And of course, I just wrote a novel that had three primary point of views and a bunch of side characters with an occasional guest appearance. And so I wanted to see what the responses were. And the very first response was, "No, that's too many, especially if it's your first book," which I'm not sure why that should matter. But anyway, my response was, ignore the people who say no and write your story the way you want to write your story. And I think, as long as you make clear, and sometimes I worry in that novel I didn't, the voices weren't necessarily distinct enough, but as long as you make clear whose voice is in each chapter or narrative chapter or each scene, why does it matter?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. Most of my novels are written in first person, but overall, they're the ones that are a series, the four novels. Each one it has a different point of view, but it's always first person. And I think one of them has 2 points of view, but it's just split down the middle. But yeah, I think if you shift from one point of view to the other fairly rapidly, you really have to make it perfectly clear where you are. And if you can do that well, then it'll work. And probably if you had, like, I don't know, a dozen points of view and you were bopping from one to the other constantly, it would it would have to be really well done to work. I think it could get kind of muddy. And yeah, having distinctive voices is really important too, so that you they don't all sound the same. In which case, you might as well just have one or 2 points of view. So yeah, it's one of those it depends things, and I'm not really qualified to speak much on that because I usually use first person. So that's me.
I feel like I've read books where it will alternate between many different first person points of view. I've read books where it will alternate between first person and third person omniscient. I've read books where it will just be all third person but different people in different chapters, and I think any number of them can work. So I don't see why. I mean, maybe there's a theoretical upper limit on how many points of view you could have, but it's certainly more than three. I'll say that. Definitely a lot more than three without having to worry about anything. So that's, again, like Audrey said, it depends, but you can make anything work, I think.
Again, Mark, I'm always in line with you with the key question that needs to be answered is if it works, if it works. Now, of course, that's easier said than done sometimes, but that is the key. That's why we always have these rules, but if it works, then you don't need the rule. However, I was thinking of a couple of books that I've read where, and let me actually preface by saying, I have only written first person in short stories I've written, and the two novels I've written are all third person. So I'm not comfortable writing with shifting first person points of view. The short stories are strictly just one first person point of view. So it's hard for me to say from experience. But as a reader, I know I was reading Stephen Brust, and I'm forgetting the name for now, but Stephen Brust, The Incrementalist, where one chapter is one person and written by Stephen Brust, and the other is co-author, the female, and they just kept alternating chapters. So you were getting like one side of the story, other side of the story. Really kind of cool. At first it jarred me because I didn't know that's what they're doing. I started reading the second one. Then I got it. I was like, right, great. And as I moved, it was a nice tempo. But then I could think of one of my least favorite books of all time. And again, it wasn't shifting chapter to chapter. It was Bronte's Wuthering Heights, where you had a couple of points where a person is telling a history and a person in that history begins to tell a history. And all the names are Heathcliff and Kathy and John. And you're down in that well trying to figure out, wait, who is talking right now? What are they talking? Which generation are they talking about? And honestly, I hated that book for that reason. That shift in point of view was, smack my hands, but I think was poorly done. So,
I hate
sometimes
I personally don't like multi-generational stories like that. Like things like that
let's give
just
them different names.
well, yeah, at least give them different names. It just that's that's so funny because I was thinking about that book.
Right. I'm
Yeah.
telling you. So, hey, it's a classic, and there are some beautiful, beautiful, haunting elements of it, but that structural component really rubbed me the wrong way. So, yeah, again, if it works, shifting that point of view can be fascinating. Can be you don't want it to be gimmicky either. I think it's important we always say that when you're breaking a rule, don't do it for the sake of breaking a rule because that could come across as a gimmick. Do it because from your heart, it's the way you feel the story needs to be told. Right.
I think that with respect to these two topics, chapter length and point of view, and a lot of the other things that we've talked about, I realized when I was looking at these tweets this past week and wondering if these were topics to talk about, I think my one piece of advice to writers is to write the first draft however the hell you want to. And I can appreciate the desire to say, well, wait a minute, I'm going to spend months or a year or 2 years writing something, and then beta readers are going to read it, or an editor is going to read it, and they're going to say, well, this is crap. You should have written it this way. So I kind of get that. And in fact, the thing that I'm working on now, I keep wanting to send to Bertold and ask him, am I completely out of my mind trying to do this? And I'm not, because it's a first draft. And you should write it however you want to. And don't worry again about chapter length or point of views, or are you doing this or are you doing that wrong? Write it. And then let it sit there for a while, read it, edit it yourself, and then let someone take a look at it and see if you did something good or there's ways to improve it.
Good point.
And this is where all those rules can, I think, really gum up a person who's just started writing and they're doing that first draft and they haven't gotten the realization that you should just write the first draft the way you want, and they'll be trying to keep to rules and all this other stuff, and then that's where they need people like us to tell them otherwise.
There was one other thing I wanted to talk about. It actually just came up this morning because or was it last night? Yeah, I read Chuck Litka's post on the blog about music and whether or not writers listen to music. And Audrey and I have two completely different preferred environments for writing. I forget exactly how you described it, but you said you would never write in a coffee shop. Writing is a lonely. I don't think you used the word lonely.
I said it's private, and that you can do it in your pajamas. I would never write in a coffee shop.
Well, my response to that was, well, I'd never write in a coffee shop either, but that's because of coffee. But give me a brewery and I'll sit and write. And as I said in my initial comment on there and in response to you, I need noise. I need distractions. I need things going on around me to be able to focus on what I'm doing, which I know sounds completely weird, but it's how I got through law school. It's how I write now. If things going on. So I'm just curious, what kind of environment, what is the world that you are in when you're writing?
I guess I'll go first just because I think mine is short, which is I can do either. I can write even if there's other stuff going on or if I'm just alone. The only thing that actually prevents me from writing is listening to music with lyrics.
I think I remember you posting something like that, yeah. For me, if I'm just the creative part, the writing part, I do sometimes put on a lot of music, and the music varies very much across the spectrum. I've posted that too on Twitter. There are times I'm listening to things that are very loud and raw, like the Youngblood, and other times I've got Brahms playing. Again, I think and sometimes I'll just put something on randomly to see if that's going to gel. Music definitely helps in the creative phase. I don't like people being around in the creative phase I like to, like Audrey said, I couldn't see myself in a coffee shop or something writing. Now, the editing phase is a little difficult for me. I've always had trouble with that because my mind is easily distracted, and that's when I need quiet. I need focus, but otherwise, yeah, creative. The more surround, the better. In fact, if I could have even, I don't know, my background changing as I'm writing, that might be fun too. It's a future thing. Yeah.
It's funny. I think I need something more quiet for the initial creating the first draft, and I can edit with all kinds of stuff going on.
Oh,
Like
wow.
I've edited where I'm
I envy
taking
you.
minutes off to look at blog posts and then get back to the editing, and there's some sort of talk radio thing going on that's talking about climate change or something, and then there's the dog and the husband, and I can work with that, but I do like to do the first draft with just a little low background noise that I don't really have to listen to.
By the way, just to point out, thank you again for the tip of editing, at least copy editing kind of stuff, going backwards.
Mm.
Still, because my trouble also is I realize as I'm editing, whether it's the high level editing or copy or whatever, as I'm reading, my brain is starting to think of other story ideas too. So it's in that mode. But your tip was extremely valuable.
Yeah, I think for copy editing, going backwards is good because you're not really engaging with the story; you're just looking at the words.
Right.
You go backwards.
Yeah, you start at the end and you do a paragraph, and then you do the preceding paragraph.
I mean, my environment is, as I said, I like having music in the background all the time. Am I paying attention to it, listening to every single song? No, but that's in the background, whether I'm writing or editing or doing anything else. I think the important thing, and I learned this when writing my first novel, is that environment does matter. Environment can help you write. It can also block you from writing. And it's something I think every writer should think about. What's the place? Where do they need to be in order to be able to be creative?